The new big points to address in today's Biblical Hebrew Grammar lecture are Smichut and numbers. First, let's talk a bit about main and subordinate clauses. This will basically just be about English grammar. You may be wondering, what is a clause? Well, a clause is basically equivalent to making a statement. In English, every clause has a subject and a verb in order to make a statement about that subject. And we can separate clauses into two groups, main and subordinate. A main clause is something that can stand on its own. You can say it out of the blue and it sounds totally grammatical, like, I will cook a pizza, or I ran out of gas. A subordinate clause, on the other hand, cannot stand on its own. If you say it out of the blue, it sounds incomplete. It sounds ungrammatical, which I have marked by an asterisk. So you can't just say out of the blue, when I get home tonight. You can't just say out of the blue, because the gauge is broken. It sounds incomplete. So if you connect these subordinate clauses to a main clause, then it's totally grammatical. So you can say, when I get home tonight, which is a subordinate clause, because it's connected to a main clause, I will cook a pizza. Or you can kind of flip it around. You can have your main clause first. I ran out of gas, followed by a subordinate clause, because the gauge is broken. Notice this word here, because. This is a conjunction. A conjunction links two things together. Those things can be words or phrases or clauses. Here they are two clauses. And because is a subordinating conjunction. It subordinates this second clause here to this first one. So the main thing that you're saying is this main clause, I ran out of gas. And what follows is really just providing support for that. You can also have coordinating conjunctions. The coordinating conjunctions keeps those two things on the same level. And in Hebrew, the two most frequent coordinating conjunctions are ve and o. And one common subordinating conjunction that you've encountered is ki. I've mentioned all this stuff about clauses, main and subordinate, and conjunctions because I want to let you know that there's a method to my madness beginning next week with how I present stories. Every line of text is equivalent to a clause. So every new line is a new clause making a new statement. And I have a way of separating out the subordinate clauses from the main clauses. And what it is, it's a nice visual way of being able to keep track of what's happening in the story. And it's especially helpful for beginner students like yourself. Okay, and moving on here now to plural Qatal forms. These are the singular forms that you've encountered so far. Remember this he did it form, that's the basic form, the one that you have memorized, the top flashcard form. And when you inflect this word for Qatal, you always add something on at the end to distinguish between who did it. And here I want to point out that these inflectional endings for the Qatal verbs are basically equivalent to those attached pronouns that you've been becoming familiar with, which are basically equivalent to the endings of the subject pronouns that you have memorized. As I read these, I'll say the subject pronoun, and I want you to hear the similarity between the endings between subject pronoun and Qatal form. So this one, ani halachti, ata halachta, at halacht, doesn't really work here for who and he, but the who is the form that you have memorized, hu halach, and he halcha, kametz he is that common feminine singular ending that you've encountered a lot so far. And you should be able to predict what the plural forms are. I'll say the subject pronoun, anachnu halachnu, atem halachtem, aten halachten. And here the they did it form doesn't distinguish between masculine and feminine. So it could be hem or henna halchu, and it will always end with a shurik. Let's see some examples of these plural forms used in context. I'll read it. Nilchamtem ba oyev. And translate, you, a group of men, fought against the enemy. Why did I say the enemy and not a enemy? Just a little review here. Well, ba is one of those three prefix prepositions, ba, ka, and la, that causes the hey of the article to drop out, and it will swallow the vowel of the article. So because this is an A-type vowel and not a shva that you have memorized for these prefix prepositions, you know it's the and not a. Moving on, Hagiborim nilchamu ba'melech hara. The warriors fought against the evil king. Now, I want you to notice something with translation. If there's no explicit subject, then you grab the pronoun reference from the verbal form, like this, you, a group of men. For this one, it's they did it, and it could be men or women. If there is an explicit subject, then you grab that in your translation rather than the pronoun. So you translate this, the warriors fought against. You don't translate both of them. You don't say, the warriors they fought against. Okay? And finally, number 3, samnu free babait. There's no explicit subject, so we grab the pronoun reference from the verb. We placed fruit in the house. And now plural object pronouns. Here are the singular forms that you've encountered so far. Remember, these forms function as the direct object of verbs, and how you form these is you take et, which is the definite direct object marker, and you add attached pronouns. When you do so, the E-type vowel of et becomes a cholam. So me is ot, you, a man, is otcha, you, a woman, is otach, him is oto, and her is ota. Now remember this dot in the hey, it's called a mapik. It marks this not as a vowel letter, kametz hey, but as a consonant hey. And it has a couple different functions, but 90-something% of the time, it marks this specifically as the attached pronoun. I've said this before, and I'll keep saying it because it'll be important later on, that when you see this mapik in the hey, you will know almost assuredly this is an attached pronoun and it means her. And it'll help you disambiguate forms later on, which will be very, very helpful. So I mention it again. The plural forms are basically what you would expect. We, or us, is otanu. You, a group of men, actually the et base form maintains its E-type vowel and does this for second person plural. Otherwise, it's a cholam. So you, etchem, you, a group of women, etchen, them, a group of men, otam, and them, a group of women, otan. Let's move on to see some of these plural forms in context. For ha'oyev harag otan. You have an explicit subject, so you translate it. The enemy slayed them. Who is them? Well, you know, it's feminine plural, so you would look back in context for a feminine plural noun. Probably nashim, women, or it could be parot, cows. Any feminine plural noun in the context is going to be its referent. Number 5, karanu otam. No explicit subject, so we translate the pronoun from the verbal form. We read them. We know them is masculine plural, so we'd look back in context and maybe it's farim for books. 6. Hamore hevin otanu. The teacher, and this word is either understand or cause to understand, and then us. So it could be the teacher caused us to understand, or maybe he's a good guy who just gets you as students. The teacher understood us, as he's someone who can sympathize with you and your weaknesses. Okay, and now for smichut, a Hebrew word that means binding. You'll also hear this sometimes called construct chain. This is all about Hebrew lacking a word equivalent for of. So how does Hebrew say, the gold of the king? or another English equivalent, the king's gold. How do you say that? Well, what you do is you basically just take both nouns, gold and king, in Hebrew, and you bind them together like one word. Zahav HaMelech means the gold of the king. These two words are bound together in Hebrew in at least two significant ways. One is indefiniteness. I have this translated the gold of the king, even though Zahav does not have the article ha. It's because, like one word, a Smichut phrase can only have one article, and that article will always be on the host word. The host word is the last word in a Smichut. The bound word is the first word in a Smichut. It is the host word that determines the definiteness of the whole phrase. If the host word is definite, the whole phrase is definite. If the host word is indefinite, the whole phrase is indefinite. The other way that a smichut binds two words together as one word is in pronunciation. This is pronounced like one big long word with one word accent right here. And so in order to get to that word accent and hit it rightly there at the end of the word, you have to pass lightly over these initial syllables. Zahav HaMelech, which is why these vowels here are written differently than what you would expect. On the flashcard, these are written kametz, kametz, but the vowels have reduced here in this bound word to shva, patach, and this phenomena of vowel reduction for bound words is quite regular in the language. And here's a chart to show that. Now, vowel reduction only pertains to the bound word, that first word in a smichut. Free here refers to any form that's not bound. Free form is the flashcard forms that you have memorized, which is also identical to a host word, the final word in a smichut. So here's a model masculine and feminine word, the way that you would have them memorized in the flashcard. Here, masculine, davar, devarim. It means word. It's not actually a word you have memorized yet, but you will next week. And para, parot, model feminine word. So, how does a bound word differ from the flashcard form that you would have memorized? Well, the key is vowel reduction. So where you have it memorized with a kametz, kametz, you'll see a shva patach. The key here to identifying a bound form of a smichut in the masculine singular is a shva. In the plural, it's not actually vowel reduction, but syllable reduction. So where you have two syllables, dava, you get one, div. And the ending changes, not rim, but re. We'll talk about the ending in a sec. For feminine, you also get vowel reduction, so kametz becomes a shva. The ending changes to not ra, but rat. We'll talk about the ending change in a sec. So vowel or syllable reduction is key to identifying a bound word in a smichut, but you don't always get it. For feminine plural, it's pronounced the same. Now, this whole thing with vowel reduction when a word gets longer, English has this too. So you have one word, photograph, you make it longer by adding a Y. Photography, that adds a syllable. In adding the syllable, you get an accent shift. So the accent here is photograph, and here it's photography. And when the word gets longer and the accent shifts, English also gets vowel reduction. So this initial O is pronounced fo. This initial O is pronounced f. And a phonologist would come along and transcribe this O with a shva. Remember, I've said that shva is the most common vowel sound in English, but we don't recognize vowel reduction in English because we don't have a symbol for shva. But I just wanted to point out that this whole, when a word gets longer, you get vowel reduction, initial vowel reduction, is not crazy. It's a common language thing. Now, the other way to identify a bound form is suffix change. So masculine singular, no suffix change, but masculine plural, you do. If you see a noun that ends in sere yod, you know that word is a plural bound word that forms a smichut. For feminine singular, if you see a noun that ends in patach tav, you basically know that's a singular bound form that forms a smichut. But notice here, so with parot, you neither get vowel reduction or a suffix change, but it can still be a bound form that forms a smichut. So it can seem complex. Like, how do I know if a word is in its regular flashcard form or in a bound or as a bound word that forms a smichut? Seems complex, but now let me make it super simple. Rule of thumb is if you see two nouns that stand side by side, assume they form a smichut. Now let's read some examples. Number 7, sefat ha'ish. So you notice that these are two nouns that stand side by side, sefat ha'ish. Now I assume that you have your flashcards memorized really, really well, and you read sefat and you recognize, oh, that sounds like safa, lip, which is a noun. So when you notice that, then you know they form a smichut. And so you can go ahead and translate it, the lip of the man. Now, a couple things remember with translating. This final word is the host word, and it determines the definiteness of the whole phrase. So this one has the article, so this one is translated as if it had the article. And when you translate, rule of thumb is you can always add the word of in between the two nouns, and you'd get a reasonable translation. So, the lip of the man. Number 8, sefat ish. And this shows you ish is indefinite, so safa is also indefinite in translation. A lip of a man. And you may wonder, well, can you ever say in Hebrew a lip of the man? So a mismatch in definiteness? The answer is yes, but you can't use a smichut phrase construction to do that. Because remember, smichut binds two words as if they're one word, and like one word, it's either definite or indefinite. Number 9, sefat ha'ish hagedolah. Notice this, noun, gedolah, adjective. And when I translate it, I have the big lip of the man. And so I'm saying that gedolah modifies safa here. Why? Well, first, if it does, why doesn't gedolah appear right after safa? The answer is because it's a smichut. These two nouns are bound together as if they're one word, so you can't split up that one word with an adjective. So the adjective, an attributive adjective, has to occur outside after a smichut, and it can modify any noun within the smichut. So how do you know which noun it modifies? Well, you keep track of gender and number. Safa, feminine singular, ish, masculine singular, gedolah, feminine singular. So you know it modifies lip and not man. You can imagine there'll be some cases where it's ambiguous. Let's read number 10. Sus ish gadol. Masculine singular noun, masculine singular noun, masculine singular adjective. And so this is truly ambiguous in form. Is the man big or the horse big? So a big man's horse or a man's big horse in translation. And only context could help you distinguish. What's being emphasized here, is it the man's bigness or the horse's bigness? Number 11, let's read it. Keves eved hamelech. Notice, one noun, two nouns, three nouns. So you can have a smichut of more than two nouns. In fact, there's no upper bound limit on how many nouns can form a smichut. Now, practically speaking, the most that I've seen in the Hebrew Bible in reading that I've noticed is 5. I've seen that several times. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a 6-word smichut. In a case where there's more than 2, you only get one host word. So the final word is always the host word, and anything before that is a bound word. So you can have multiple bound, but only one host. And the host word alone determines the definiteness of the whole thing, because remember, it's as if it's one word, so one article. Now notice here that keves and eved, I've said that they're bound words even though they're identical in form to the flashcard forms you have memorized. So how do you know to translate this like a smichut? Well, it's because you remembered my rule of thumb that whenever you have 2 or 3 nouns side by side, assume it's a smichut. So this is translated, the sheep of the servant of the king. And finally, numbers. Here I specify cardinal numerals. That's because Hebrew and English both have two different sets of numbers. You can have numbers that count items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can have numbers that set an order to those items, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So if you're counting, you would use cardinal numerals. Here are the cardinal numerals in Hebrew. Now, if you're counting on your hand, up to 10 using your fingers, you would use the feminine forms, achat, shtaim, shalosh. There are two different sets of number forms for Hebrew because it depends if you're describing a masculine noun or a feminine noun. If you're describing a masculine noun, you would use these forms. A masculine noun like sus. So 1, you would say sus echad, 2, shnaim susim, 3, shlosha susim. If you're describing a feminine noun, you'd use these forms. A feminine noun like para achat, shtaim parot, shalosh parot. So 2 different forms for whether you're describing a masculine noun or a feminine noun. Here's where things get further complicated. If you're describing a masculine noun, you typically can describe it using 2 different forms. Not with number 1, because number 1 is uniquely an adjective, while numbers 2 through 10 are grammatically nouns. And for nouns, you can have the noun form be a free form or a bound form. And when it's a bound form, it's forming a smichut with the noun that it's modifying. You can recognize this as a bound form because it ends in ser yod, this because the he has become a tav. And the same thing happens with the feminine forms. No bound for number 1 because it's an adjective. 2 through 10 are nouns. You can see this as a bound form because it ends in ser yod. This because you get vowel reduction. Kametz becomes a shva. Now, for the forms that you have memorized, when you memorize these flashcards, you only just memorize the free forms, and that just like, all the other nouns that you memorize. One further complicating thing here is look number 3. It ends with kametz he. I said this agrees with a masculine noun, even though you're used to kametz he being a feminine ending. And similarly here, this I said agrees with a feminine noun, even though it doesn't have a distinct ending, which you assume may be masculine. And this goes for numbers 3 through 10. Look like this. And some Hebrew scholars say it's because these nouns take the opposite gender of the noun that they agree with. I'm with others who say, no, it just looks like they take the opposite gender of the noun they agree with. And I have it listed for you this way on the flashcards. So when you memorize the flashcards, the masculine form is on the top, the feminine form is on the bottom. So for number 1, you memorize it as echad, achat. 2 is shnaim, shtaim. 3 is shlosha, shalosh. Okay, let's look at some examples using these numbers. 1 man is ish echad. If you want to say the one man, you would say ha-ish ha-echad. Remember, number 1 is grammatically an adjective, so it must always occur after the noun and the article must agree. Indefinite, no article. Definite, article. 14, let's look at some variation for how you would form things using numbers 2 through 10. Let's just look at 2. If I wanted to say 2 horses, there's a few different ways I could say it. I could use the bound form of 2, shnei susim, and as a bound form, it must always occur first. Remember, bound form, first word in a smichut, and then here's the host word, the last word in a smichut. Or you could use the free form, which could also occur first, shnaim susim. If you use this free form, it doesn't have to occur first, it can occur afterward. So you could say susim shnaim. And here are 3 different ways in Hebrew that you can say 2 horses. So there's a lot of variation. So boy, Hebrew, a lot of different forms, even some variation. Seems complicated, right? And it is complicated for speaking, for producing it. But your goal is to read it, right? And when you're reading, the Hebrew and all the agreement is done for you. And so if you see a number next to a noun, as long as you know what the number means and the noun means, you know the number modifies the noun, so you know how to understand it. So reading is actually not all that complicated. All right, and that's it for today's lecture.